Thank you.
You're on.
Hello and welcome, and ho, 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 Merry Christmas. I'm Shelly Carney with the Gypsy Kiss, the vlog.
And I'm Toby Eunice. Stick with us for a couple of seconds, and we will tell you the correct way to ask Forrest Fenn a question.
Ho, ho, ho.
Oh.
And we're back.
Wow, we should start that show over. So I had first of all, I hit the lower third instead of the intro. So the lower third was on top of the intro. This isn't going to be one of our better openings. So.
Oh, well.
We'll just have to live with it.
Yes, we will. Okay. So we're going to talk today about...
Merry Christmas.
Merry Christmas.
Yeah.
We're going to talk about Merry Christmas. Merry Christmas.
Merry Christmas.
So we have a whole week until Christmas to celebrate.
Mm-hmm.
But we're not coming back next week, right?
No, we'll tell folks, well, don't say it that way. Oh. We are coming back.
Unless net neutrality says no. We can't have you on there
Sherry's
anymore.
really heard about this whole FCC net neutrality thing.
That's right.
So what we're going to talk about today is the correct way to interview someone, to conduct an interview, asking the questions that will result in eliciting the most information.
Okay.
But before we start that, let's do some housekeeping.
Housekeeping. Thought you had a maid for that.
I do. Can't you tell?
Presentation, we followed by a Q&A. So we actually are having a presentation today. It's a brief one, but we're going to talk about how to conduct an interview or how to ask Forrest Fenn a question and if you want him to answer it.
And by the way, you can use these skills in any situation in which you, as I said earlier, have to elicit information from someone and you need their help in doing it, their cooperation in doing it. These are skills that I developed and learned and developed as a journalist and documentary maker.
So, volunteer for moderators. So we're hoping that somebody who's already been a moderator will show up and will automatically be one. Oh, we do. We have Man in the Barn and Jimmy Fast, and they're both still moderators. So we look forward to having you guys do that for us today.
Did you check your volume?
Yes.
Okay.
And Super Chat. Super Chat's available if you'd like to wish us a Merry Christmas with a little cha-ching.
Cha-ching.
Cha-ching. I think when your phone did that the other day. Cha-ching.
That's eBay, sale on eBay, a little cha-ching there.
Yeah. So, yeah, that's available to you if you would like to share a little Christmas cheer and open Q&A day. So after we finished our questions... or after we finish our presentation about questions, then you can start asking your questions, and they can be on any topic, Fenn related or not, as we promised in our little promo.
Yeah.
Right?
So they don't have to be on this topic. They can be on Fenn or on any other subject that you think we have an opinion on, because that's what we're expressing when
Toby
we do that.
pretty much has an opinion on everything.
On everything.
So
except when it comes to net neutrality, Shelly's opinions are much more violent than mine.
I don't know about that.
I don't know if violent's the right word.
So there we go. And if you'd like to go ahead and share this with your friends so that they know that we are live, and we'll get started.
You ready?
Go for it.
Okay, so what I wanted to talk about today is how to ask a question that will elicit the most information. And I want to do it in the context of talking with Forrest Fenn, because I know this, because of the time that I spent with him, this approach works with him. He's much more responsive, much more open, and much more talkative when you ask this kind of open-ended question. And basically what I'm going to do is describe the differences between a closed question and an open question. And what you see a lot of is closed questions. And the closed questions have the tendency, they have two tendencies. One, to cut down the conversation, and two, it's a way of the individual who's asking the questions to substantiate something they may already know or believe. When it's a closed question, it will start with something other than the 5 W's and H. And what I mean by that is it won't start with who, what, where, when, why, or how. The 6 keys of journalism. It will start with do, does, should, shouldn't, could, couldn't, anything like that. But it's not going to start with the 5 W's and an H. A good example is, have you searched in Wyoming? The answer to that question is one of 3 things. Yes, no, or I don't know, meaning I don't know where Wyoming is. Or do you think the treasure is in New Mexico? Yes, no, I don't know. The difference is it presupposes information. It presupposes that you already know that there's a treasure in Wyoming, New Mexico, Colorado, or Montana, and you're just affirming that information with this individual. And then the other thing that it does is it doesn't enable the conversation to expand from that point. It shuts down the conversation pretty quickly, especially if the person who you're interviewing is starting to figure out that you're leading them down a path. This goes a lot. This happens a lot in bars, if you don't mind me saying so, where they say, "Are you a Gemini?" and the answer is no. Then they try something else. So what they're doing is they're building a decision tree to kind of get you to where they want you to be, rather than
we won't say where that is.
Yeah. It's further down. This is going to have goodbye monetization. So those are closed questions. They won't get you anywhere, and you'll end up irritating the individual that you're interviewing if you're there for some other purpose than to just substantiate your own position on a matter. Open-ended questions will begin with one of the 5 W's and an H. They will begin with what, where, who, when, why, or how. And I'll go back to my bar question. Are you a Gemini is one way to say it, but another way to say it to open up the conversation is, what sign are you? It's a completely different perspective on exactly what you're trying to accomplish. For example, instead of saying, did you search in New Mexico last season, then a better way to ask that question is, where did you search last season? That opens it up to allow them to talk and respond with something other than yes, no, or I don't know. What was it about Denver Museum that intrigued you? Or instead of, did you go to the Denver Museum? Or are you planning to go to the Denver Museum? All of those are yes, no questions. This gives me the opportunity to expand upon the answer. So the response, the nice thing about it is that the response is open and sometimes unlimited. And what I've discovered about Forrest is that when you give him one of these open-ended questions, he does a really good job of answering the question. And then it stimulates another thought before you've had an opportunity to ask a follow-on. And he'll go off, and the danger is that he can go off, fall off on another topic. Mm-hmm. That wasn't the basis of your question. You have to be good about that. Let him talk. It presupposes nothing. When you ask an open-ended question, you're not directing someone down that decision tree that I was talking about earlier. You're not trying to get them to a place where you're at. You're simply trying to collect information. And then it creates opportunity to follow on. So when you hear somebody talk that long, they're going to be saying things that you may not have imagined they were planning to say. And so you get out this new information. That's an opportunity for you to take in that information and construct another follow-on question about it. Again, it's an open-ended question. So it makes for the discussion better. And as I said, this is a tool that most journalists, most documentary makers who are really good at their job will use in order to get the information you need. So there are some caveats, though, and I'll give you the caveats real quick. First of all, don't interrupt, which is hard for me to do. Don't interrupt. Let them talk until it seems that they're getting off track. Then politely get them back on track by saying something like, you know what, we're going to be covering that in a minute. Let me get back to my questions. And I didn't put this in here, but I'm going to tell you one more thing that I found very useful, especially in documentary making. I teach a class in documentary making, and one of the things I tell the students is you can make a documentary if you have 10 people we call them SME, subject matter experts. If you have 10 people and you ask those 10 people the same 10 questions. And with that and some really good B-roll, you can make a credible documentary. But the point on the 10 questions is the 10 questions should tell a story. Toby, where were you born? What schools did you attend? When did you decide to go into the military? What was it about the military that intrigued you? When did you get married? And take me through my life cycle, or take the individual through whatever the process is, but a story that has a beginning, a middle, and an end, and finish it with questions like, now that you've accomplished all this and you've decided to retire, what are your plans for the near-term future? What impact is that going to have on your friendships and what we're doing with the Gypsy Kiss? So it tells a story from beginning to end, and that's an important part of what you should do in your Q&A. So back to, sorry, I interrupted myself. Don't interrupt. Don't see if you can avoid asking why or why not. In my career, I have had several situations in which I've used why and why not, but they were intended to be confrontational. They were intended to get information that the person who was providing the information didn't want to give. If it is not a hostile interview, if it's a friendly interview, you shouldn't have to ask why or why not. You can use the other W's and the H without ever getting to why or why not. Try it out sometime, because you'll discover that the only time you use why is to pick at something that they may have said or that you already know about them. Don't compound questions. And you can always hear a compound question because there's an and in it. And it will be like, where did you go last search season, and what did you do when you got there? That's what I refer to as the compound questions. I've seen even longer and bigger ones because they can get real compound real quick. One sentence, one question. You'll have plenty of time, and it's better to organize your information when you limit yourself to those series of questions. It's going to be easier for you to pull out the information after the interview if you don't record it and you're just making notes. And then finally, generally speaking, we'll all have a tendency to put a preamble on the front of the question. And what I mean by a preamble is some information that the interviewee may require to establish context. So I could say to Shelly, you know, we've been doing this now for 3 years, and we're going along very nicely with the Gypsy's Kiss. What are we planning for next year? So that's a question that has a brief preamble that establishes context. What I'm going to recommend to you is limit the length of your preamble. One short sentence. I've seen even the best of journalists go on with preambles that last for 3 or 4 sentences before they actually get to the question. Back in the days where President Obama would decide to have a press conference, there were always members of the press who would speak for, I don't know, 3 or 4 minutes, some of them, before they finally got to the question. That is not often done with President Trump, only because the questions they ask him are very limiting themselves. They just need, for a lot of times, they just need a yes or no. This is itchy. So keep your preamble short and sweet. And when you go to the interview, don't wear a silly hot wool hat. That'll drive them crazy. No.
It's acrylic.
So I pulled some, I went through some, and I want you to know I'm not intentionally being critical of anyone. So I haven't identified where I got these, but these are questions that have been asked. So here's one that I thought was really interesting because it was supposed to be one question. It starts with a very short preamble. Forrest Fenn's treasure hunt is such an extraordinary challenge. I would have finished that with an exclamation point. But then it goes, and although they used question marks, it turns into a compound question. When you first became aware of it, what went through your mind? How would you say your thoughts about the treasure and your search have changed since first learning about it? To me, that's not one compound question. It's 3 very different questions, each of which has its own right to be asked independently and to get a complete answer from. So after a very nice start with a short preamble, then it becomes a series of questions before you can even answer the first one. And the reality is, when you do it this way, it's very likely that at least one of the questions is not going to get an answer because they can't remember that. Mm-hmm. And even worse, they may choose to answer just one of the questions and feel satisfied that, oh, okay, you got your answer. You know, mm-hmm. I've seen that happen a lot mm-hmm. too. So another example is, this one surprised me because of the length of the preamble. This is the entire question, but you know, you're 3/5 of the way through it before you complete the preamble and explanation. And then it's a bunch of yes/no questions. Can you share why you feel so strongly as in New Mexico? No, I'm not going to share that. Do you ever consider one of the other states? No, I don't. It's in New Mexico for forest treasure to be hidden. And one of the things that I found this interesting is, now normally if you're lucky, people won't decide to do that. They'll say, and they'll expand on that. But when I teach this class, I teach a class in hosting. And one of the things that the students have to do is they have to host a show where I'm the guest. Mm-hmm. And when they ask me one of these questions, I just answer no. And literally the studio falls silent because they're not sure quite where to go from that, because what they wanted was an answer. And so it helps them imagine what would it be like to ask the question that would have given them the long answer. And then in example 3, it was kind of the same thing. Thousands of search for Forrest Fenn's treasure, and yet it remains undiscovered. It's been said as first clue. And this is the reason I picked this example is this is the one that seeks verification. This isn't really a question. This is, I want you to validate my thinking on the matter by telling me what you think to see if it matches what I think. So here's what I think, and then why do you feel that is? And what I'm doing is asking you to fight with me. I've already established how I feel. Then why do you feel that is? And the correct answer to that is, I don't feel the same way that you do. I have different feelings on the matter. So do you feel where warm waters halt is only to be confirmed once a treasure is found? And this is the question that sounded to me the most like a confirmation request. Don't you feel like it's supposed to be the first warm waters, blah, blah, blah? You know, and you almost ask it like that. And then I get a second option, or do you feel the poem might hold a confirmation or hint for the first clue in some way? The person you're interviewing may not feel any of that. But because you've penned them in, they're stuck with giving you an answer that may or may not confirm what you believe or what you want confirmed. So this is kind of a classic example of all of those fit into one thing that's not going to give you data. It's not going to give you new information that you can use to accomplish whatever your mission is. In this case, accomplishing the mission is just getting through a quality interview and getting the data from that interview. This isn't going to do it. So other examples. So I wanted to give you a couple of good examples, and I picked myself for the good examples.
Yeah, well, there you are, leading yourself down the same path. Here's where I am. Now let's follow me here.
Right. Don't ask any questions, just do what I say. No, just teasing. I don't really mean that. So I wanted to give you a couple of examples, especially as they related to Forrest. The first example is about 34 minutes into the collected works book signing from November 2nd. He had been asked a number of questions, most of which he avoided answering with Shiloh's help. The few that he did answer tended to be the yes-no answers because the questions were asked in that way. And Fenn is a really smart guy when it comes to these. If you ask him a yes-no question, he'll give you a yes-no, or even worse, sometimes I don't know answer. So don't give him that opportunity. Ask an open-ended question. So at about 34 minutes, I got the opportunity to ask a question. You'll see when you go to that, there's a short preamble to establish the position. And then I asked him an open-ended question. Here's what was interesting about Fenn's response. Number one, Shiloh, there was no interpretation required, no translation, if you will, required by Shiloh. Fenn looked at me, called me by name, answered the question, finished it by asking me whether or not I felt he had answered the question, and then went on to a completely different topic without any further stimulus of any kind. That's the kind of question he likes. It's on topic, it's open-ended, it stimulates for him additional thinking. There was no question of his hearing aid not working or whether or not it had to be translated by Shiloh in order to know Hans and looking at Shiloh. None of that. He answered the question directly, and that's what I'm talking about when you're dealing with him. The more direct and open the question is, the more limited on topic the question is, the happier he is with it, and the more likely it is to answer his question. Now, he's still not going to answer questions that have anything to do with the possibility that he might be giving you additional clues for finding the treasure. But if you want to have a conversation with Forrest, you can have a conversation with open-ended questions that are on topic, and generally don't force him into thinking about whether or not he's providing you a clue that he may not be providing other searchers. The other thing that I'm going to recommend you do is go to our blog, gypsieskiss.com, and click on the Interviews tab. When I established A Gypsy's Kiss, well, this is not going to be true. I established A Gypsy's Kiss a long, long time ago. And for most of that time, it covered my sailing adventures when I was on the East Coast. When I moved out here and I decided to start participating in the search, I made the transition over to making the topic related to the Fenn search. And one of the things I wanted to do was I wanted to conduct what I would call documentary level interviews. And so I would contact, and I didn't know a lot of these people directly, not that I know many of them now, but I contacted people like David Rice, Desert File, and I contacted Dale Neitzel and Margie Goldsmith, the writer. And I asked him if I could interview them, do an audio interview, and they agreed. And so I put those in the tab on A Gypsy's Kiss called Interviews. Go back and listen to some of those interviews. All open-ended questions, establishes conversation. They're 30 minutes or longer, 30 minutes or longer long. And there's a lot of information to be had by them, and I think the individual had a good time with it. One of the people I interviewed was Raynell Jacobson, who was the woman who was the Fenn's the beneficiary of the raffle that Fenn did for one of his jars, one of his bronze jars. And what you'll hear in this interview is a lot of hope. Anyway, all that hope came out, and you can tell just by the conversation we had with her that that it was a good interview for her, and it was open, and I highly recommend you listen to it, not just because it's Raynell and because of what she went through, but because it's a pretty damn good interview, and you can learn about the process. So go to gypsieskiss.com/interviews. Shelly and I have been talking about this, and we had a couple of, I don't want to call them false starts, where we were going to try and do live interviews on here. We did one with Kyle Lazars, with Mike Howling, and I thought that went really, really well. But I wanted to do others. So we're thinking about going back to creating some more of these audio-only interviews with people who are involved in the search. They will be audio only. Shelly and I will do them together. They will be scheduled. They will not take the place of our weekly show. They will add to our content, both our archive of content both on the blog and our YouTube channel. But we think it's important that the people in the search are recognized for their accomplishments and what they're doing without having to share their secret locations and their definition of special places. So if you have a couple of seasons worth of boots on the ground under your belt, an active searcher, and you would be interested in doing an audio interview with Shelly and I that would be posted to our blog and to our YouTube channel, then send us an email and tell us why. And yes, I'm being confrontational. Tell us why you'd make an interesting interview, and we'll get back in touch with you and start scheduling it or figure out how we get that done. So, and next week, we're not going to be here.
That's right. Well, we are, but we're going to have a party.
Yeah.
It's office Christmas party.
Yeah, I'm hosting a party at my place for friends and family. But it is our show is next Tuesday is the day after Christmas, and we thought we'd take that day off. I may put up some another video. We're trying to expand our base into other things, so I'm going to be doing some things that are not necessarily Fenn related, but are related to the manner in which I operate. And so I may put up a couple of videos related to that, but we're not going to have a show next Tuesday. The next time you'll see us in terms of a live stream is going to be January 2nd. And on January 2nd, we'll finally get to Clayton's document, How to Write a Poem, that has a riddle inside of it. And our understanding, I've had the opportunity to review it while I was on vacation last week, and it's damned interesting. So, and I could see some of... I'm not sure, I'm not quite convinced that Fenn actually used this to write his poem, but he could have. And then what else? Oh, we're planning, so that I changed my mind about Chaco Canyon, which I have the right to do. And we're planning a mid-January trip to the Denver Museum. And I made a blog post on it, so take a look at the blog. It explains why I did it, and we'll fill everybody in and post pictures and all of that when we get back after I've had time to process it. So, there. P.S. The treasure is in New Mexico.
Merry Christmas.
Merry Christmas. I think that's it.
Oh, is it my turn to talk?
Yes, it's your turn.
Can we go back?
Okay, how far back do you want to go?
All the way. Keep going.
Oh, really?
Yes.
Oh,
Thank
that bad,
you.
huh?
Well,
you should have just slapped me.
Don't interrupt.
Okay, sorry. Good point.
Somebody taught me that.
How far back should I go?
One more. All right. So, I'm going to stop saying so. You told us that this is based on creating a documentary, or in other words, a verbal questioning. So what if somebody were to want to write to Forrest and ask a question? What would you recommend then?
I think you could use exactly the same strategy as long as you avoided asking any kind of question, whether it's open or closed, that related to additional clues in the search or validation of what your solution is, etc., etc. I think if you were to write him tonight and ask him an open-ended question about his new book or about Preston's preface, he would answer it completely. But I think if you were to write him and ask an open-ended question that validates your solution in some way, he's not going to respond. He's past that. And I think the longer we wait, honestly, the fewer and fewer questions of any kind will he answer. I think he's going to limit his responses to the people that he's most comfortable with. I am not amongst them. So.
Well, I don't think that I am either.
Well, yeah, but he likes you a lot more than he does me.
So the problem with Forrest with me is he can't hear me. So
yeah.
I feel intimidated a lot of times when somebody can't hear me and I don't want to shout at them. I'll shorten up the question really short, and then it ends up being a yes or no question, and that doesn't help anybody.
That doesn't, right, you're right.
So, yeah, it's difficult. That's why I would recommend, if I were to recommend, that somebody would write to him rather than ask him in person. You're less likely to see him in person, for one thing.
Right.
And then, you know, you do have his email address, and people have been writing to him, and he hasn't been responding. So is there anything you want to add to that?
Well, as I said, as I've said now for months, I think he's transitioning away from being focused on the state of the search. And I think part of that moving away from being focused on the state of the search means not spending 3 or 4 hours every night going through the forums or answering questions or doing all this stuff that his doctor probably recommended he should not do. Mm-hmm. He's 88 now, 87, whatever. So, can I take this one?
I don't care.
Okay. Yeah. No
Santa
wonder.
Claus. Poor Santa Claus.
No wonder Santa hates that outfit.
So, what else was I going to ask you? Oh, so I would suggest, again, we talked about hostile witness.
Yeah.
The difference between questioning a hostile witness and somebody who is there to promote their business, for instance. I could ask somebody who's here to promote something, I could ask them anything, and they're just going to go on and on about whatever it is they're promoting, their new book or their product or whatever it is. But what would you do, and what have you done? I know you've worked with hostile witnesses before, and what's the difference between the two?
Well, when it comes to either litigation or establishing facts for the purposes of potential litigation, that was all. I spent a couple of years in the Balkans doing exactly that. You do ask yes/no questions. And you are leading them to a particular point. You're moving them down that decision tree to a particular point. So you are less likely, you'll start with open-ended questions, because what open-ended questions do is get the subject comfortable. They get comfortable with you. But the minute you see the opportunity to establish facts, and you see it on TV all the time if you've never been in court, and I always highly recommend somebody going to court for a criminal trial, because what the attorney will do, a good prosecution attorney will do, will start asking yes or no questions, because those are the ones that are most likely to cause the person to stumble in their set of responses. So when it comes to litigation, you're far more likely to use closed-ended questions, but you're also far more likely to have a strategy that gets you to a particular point where the person effectively admits the crime, having done the crime. So.
Did you have anything to do with that man who took poison that was for his war crimes?
No, that was World War II. I'm not that old.
Oh, I thought he was Bosnian.
No. Oh, no, I know who you're talking about. No, I didn't have anything to do with him. He just didn't want it. He knew he was about to, the court was about to indict him, and he was going to be hung. So he decided he wanted to do a Goering. Herman Goering did that.
Oh, boy.
After Nuremberg.
Okay. So not on your watch.
Not on my watch, no.
I think that is all that I had for this, so let's go to...
By the way, remember, guys, for those of you, ladies and gentlemen, for those of you that weren't here earlier, if you want to take advantage of the Smart Chat feature, you can...
Super Chat.
And
we've had a couple, actually.
Oh, we have Super Chat. So if you see somebody's questions highlighted, and we'll answer those first, that means they've taken advantage of the Super Chat to get some attention, and we're all about giving you attention.
That's right. So speaking of Super Chat, B. Cross, that's Bill, right?
Bill Cross.
Bill Cross.
Say hi, Bill.
$5. Thank you. Cha-ching. And Jan Kerb, Christmas gift. You guys have been great. $10.
Thank you.
Merry Christmas.
Wow, that's really kind.
Thank you.
Very thoughtful.
And now let's go back to the questions. All right. So we have a hello from Man in the Barn and Jimmy Fast and
gentlemen,
David
good to have you
Dow, here. Cindy Guess, T.I. Mattis.
Cindy and T.I. are sisters.
Oh.
They live in different locations.
AJ 21. Lots of Merry Christmas. Thomas D. How goes the search?
Better all the time.
Man in the Barn. We're in. Okay, good. World famous gamer, Merry Christmas.
We're trusting Man in the Barn and a couple of other folks like Jimmy Fast.
Jimmy Fast is here.
To protect, to cover, to make sure, check our six.
Yes. Jeremy Milstead, hello. World famous gamer, loves my elf ears. Thank you. Let's see. Scott P., glad you're putting this one out. I've been emailing him for 3 years with no replies, even when I sent him birthday cards. Well, we didn't get a reply from our birthday card either, did we?
We didn't, no.
You're right. Yeah. Let's see. But, you know, do you always reply if somebody sends you a birthday card? I don't know. It is unusual nowadays, actually. Let's see. World famous gamer, tried to get a hold of him, but no luck. No.
I think it's going to become more and more rare that anyone does. I think he's going to limit his conversations to what I refer to as outbound conversations, where he needs somebody to help him, you know, most likely Dale or what's the woman, Cynthia Meacham, all of whom have very good relationships with him. And I know, and I've noticed that he turns to them when he needs something, unless it's live stream, and then
comes to you.
And then I hear from him. What else was I going to say? Oh, and the other thing that I thought was interesting is that Desert File, David Rice, who's one of the ones that has organized and hosted Fenbury, has indicated on one of the forums, at least I don't follow a lot of them, that they're looking for someone else to host Fenbury 2018, that he's not going to be doing it because he's got building a cabin, and Cynthia is going to be out of the area for part of the year. So if anybody's interested in Fenbury 2018, in putting together Fenbury 2018, get in touch with Desert File so that he knows you are interested.
All right. Public service announcement there. Let's see. Jeremy Milstead says, out of 6 emails I've sent, Fenn has responded once. I asked him about the bombs on page 99 of Thrill of the Chase. He does like to talk about...
He does like to talk about explosives, doesn't he?
Yeah, seems to. Sean, do we need to sign in on a form so that Forrest knows we have attended this class and are qualified to ask him a question?
As a matter of fact, I'm going to recommend that if you actually want him to answer the question, don't mention my name.
Yes, but if you want to ask Toby questions in the future, it's good to keep these things in mind.
Yeah.
Let's see. Bill Gorman's here.
Hey, Bill.
Edward Owen is here. Will Forrest Fenn's Nightline interview be aired? Do you know? Do we know?
We don't know. We haven't seen it. And Nightline is especially hard to keep track of because they don't publish their schedule. So I've been keeping an eye out for it, but I haven't seen it yet. My guess is they'll get through the holidays because there's lots of other things happening between what's going on in Congress and in Washington and the activities around the world.
Throwing another bomb up. So.
Yeah. So I imagine it'll come after the beginning of the year when things tend to settle down.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I don't know. Something popped in and out of my head. So I was like, what's that?
I saw it come out the elf ears.
Did you see it?
Yeah.
Leaked out. That's why I shouldn't have 4 ears. Let's see. Merry Christmas. Bill Gorman. I asked him in person, what do you think of me? He answered, you're the craziest guy I know. I told him thank you. I have to... Oops. Have to be as crazy as the guy who hid it to find it. Well, there's that.
Were you wearing your elephant mask when you...
And hello from Bill. Let's see, Alan James. When did the stream start? Our stream starts at 1 o'clock on Tuesdays at Mountain Time. 1 o'clock Mountain Time on Tuesdays. Except for next week.
Which we've already advised you of in advance.
Right.
We're not gonna. It's the day after the holiday, so we won't be doing a stream next week.
Let's see. Bill from Texas. What is Fenn's email address?
ForrestFenn@gmail.com.
And then, oh, sorry. Jimmy Fast already answered that.
Oh, okay. Thank you, Jimmy.
I'm just going through this a little slow, sorry. Okay. Shane McLaughlin. Can you please clarify why Forrest Fenn gave acknowledgement to Andrew Briggs' solve that caused so much controversy and nothing else was covered after that on the Santa Fe radio talk show?
I don't. So that would be a yes/no question if I wanted to. No, I don't want to tell you.
Can you clarify?
Can you clarify? No. I can give you my opinion. And my opinion on the matter is that if you read Fenn's response to the question he was asked or how it was presented to him, it was what I would refer to as guarded, and there was no follow-on question. He doesn't really answer the question other than to be what I would call polite. but it demanded a follow-on, and the follow-on was not asked. So I'm not sure that I agree necessarily that he acknowledged it in any way that would imply that it was a valid solution. I think my opinion on the matter is that he acknowledged it in a way that would acknowledging the idea that I'd get hot in a Santa Claus hat. It wasn't an acknowledgement of the solution, the validity or the quality, the integrity of the solution. I don't think that's what it was.
From Bill Cross. Did you and Shelly say in all of your searches that you've never run into another searcher? Have we ever run into another searcher on one of our searches?
No, honestly, I'm not. I think in all of our searches, I've been on 27 searches. Shelly has been on, what, 6 now?
Something like that.
First of all, I've never run into another searcher. And in all of that time, I've only ran into one person who actually knew what the Forrest Fenn treasure was. And he happened to be a retired Marine who was working as a groundskeeper for the city of Lander, Wyoming. And he knew what I was talking about. And Shelly will tell you, whenever we do go out on a recon, I enter into a lot of those conversations. If I walk into a...
Which is the whole reason we got business cards.
Exactly. If we're sitting at a restaurant and the waitress comes up, the minute I get a chance, I ask the waitress, things like, what would you think of if I said to you, where warm waters halt? And I'll do that to a waitress, and I'll do that to a gas station attendant, and I'll do that to a sporting goods store owner. And I have yet to have someone to say, oh, you must be looking for Forrest Fenn's treasure, once in 6 years. Mm-hmm. 5 years.
All right. Oh, yes. Thank you, Cindy. Cindy Guess, from last week, remember, we talked about Reverend Toby. She says, the treasure is in New Mexico. Tell us how Reverend Toby relates to the treasure.
So I'll give you a hint, and always in my opinion. The point at which Reverend Toby was assassinated on the Cimarron it was in Cimarron Canyon, lines up with where we believe the clue "No Place for the Meek" is.
Okay. Jazz Winters, I agree it's in New Mexico, but the little girl from India still bothers me. She could still see it on the map, so somehow I see the treasure state would be the obvious Montana. Your thoughts?
Well, if we remember correctly, what Fenn said was that the little girl in India, implying that she would never find herself boots on the ground in the Rocky Mountains of the United States, that she could identify the first 2 clues on a map or Google Earth, but that was it. So the implication is she could identify where warm waters halt, assuming her research was accurate, and the road or the traverse in the canyon down. I would expect that to be true, and the advice I give to people who are planning to search is that you should be able, if you can find the first 2 clues on the map, put some boots on the ground. Now, what you're going to find when you get there is that everything that you thought was going to follow that is going to look completely different once your boots on the ground. But I believe that where warm waters halt and the canyon down can be found on Google Earth, and that means that they can be found in any one of the 4 search states. And that's the limitation for our little East Indian girl.
I'm going to read this again because I wanted to talk about it for a second. From AJ Rainville, repeating Edward's question earlier, when will the Nightline interview air? And we did talk about that, and probably won't be until the new year. Basically, it's a human interest story as far as I could tell. So those kind of fit in whenever they have empty space to fill rather than being something that they're in a hurry to get out, especially if it's not time sensitive. But when we did the interview with Asahi TV in Japan, they continued to push us out a little bit more because they had other more important things that they were focusing on at the time.
And that's what they would say to us. We'd say, did it air? And they'd say, no, our prime minister resigned today, so we have to cover that story. So Shelly's absolutely correct in that when you have a human interest story like this, whether or not, you've got to remember that the rest of the world doesn't see this as A, critical, or B, controversial. It's human interest. So if you have an interest in the individual and they're putting together a package that will talk about Fenn, that will talk about the treasure, that will talk about the deaths, that will talk about the controversies, et cetera, et cetera. Yeah, the new book. But
it's not like it's a New York Times bestseller, so they're not in a hurry to get it out there.
It'll be a while.
He wants to know, this is from Bill Cross. He wants to know why we don't do the Fenbury. Because Toby's retired.
In the past, ever since September 1st, I get an average of, 3 calls a week from people who I say thank you, but I'm retired. And I'm really trying hard to be as retired as I possibly can be. So we'll and honestly, this keeps us busy. I mean, I know you guys may not think of it, but this, between the research and the preparation and the effort of looking for new topics and the conversations we have and the material that we archive, et cetera, it's not quite a full-time job, but it doesn't leave room for a lot of other things, which is why we wanted to just focus on this. And also Shelly's 2 programs, and we shoot Shelly's programs on the same day that we shoot this. So
yes. And then we had a little job this morning, that's kind of leftover job, didn't we?
Yeah, we have a friend who owns a trade show exhibit who's been a friend and a client now for, 5 years. And we entered into an agreement with her that required some video recording over a period of months and then an effort. When's the B2B Expo? April. So we have to do this B2B Expo. And I promised her this, and then I wrote her to let her, and we have a contract to do it. And I wrote her to tell her that I was retiring, but that we would finish that. So we did. Today was the last of the video recording, right? When we do the B2B Expo, that's live streaming, but that will be the last.
Then you'll be done with editing.
Then I'll be done. I won't have to edit. I'm done. So
yay. Jazz Winters, non-related Fenn question. Toby, being in the military, what are your thoughts on this UFO sightings back in 2004 the Pentagon released that Navy pilots recorded and in the news now? Your thoughts?
Well, it's in the news because they spent $22 million on it. That's the only reason it was in the news. It was the Navy pilots recorded some video that when you look at it, it looks very credible to me. I'm not a believer necessarily in UFOs, but they were looking at something. There was more than one of them. And so the story is the Pentagon decided it was so well documented, they had to do something. So they put, Pentagon style, $22 million worth of research into it. And then after 5 years worth of effort and $22 million spent, mostly probably with contractors who would be very happy to take that money from you, taxpayer money, they came to zero in the way of conclusion. And for some reason or the other, I'm not sure what happened, but it popped up again in the news. It's an old story that's interesting because the $22 million was spent, and it was spent on the Pentagon chasing down UFOs. And I believe, based on the video that I saw, that the naval aviators actually did see something because they recorded it, and it was obvious in the recording that it was something other than a normal aircraft. And I do believe that the Pentagon spent $22 million on that, but I could name, a couple dozen programs that the Pentagon spent money on that didn't result in anything anyway. So the Pentagon is really good, and don't get me wrong, I loved my military service. I love the military. But man, can they spend money. And ever since 9/11, contractors, biggest business in the world, basically, because they know how to spend money. So But I don't think there's anything there. Would I like UFOs to exist? Not particularly, because if they can get here, that means they're way smarter than we are. And it's going to be the ant problem. What was that movie with Independence Day? Independence Day. That's what you're going to get out of aliens. You're not going to get happy people that come to
Twilight Zone. It's a cookbook.
Yeah.
Remember that?
Yeah. Independence Day, except for the sequel, which wasn't very good.
All righty. By the way, and this is not a question, but I want to talk about it anyway. Jen Kerb, the Netflix TV program Longmire, did a fictional episode about treasure hunters searching for a Fenn-like treasure following a poem in Wyoming. Well done. Some might enjoy that. I did see that. It's on Netflix. The whole series is on there. And actually, I remember when they put out the call for extras for that, and I thought about it.
Longmire was filmed here
busy.
in New Mexico,
Yeah.
interestingly.
Yeah, I know it's pretty busy, so I didn't do it. But I did see that episode, and it was cute. I knew a few people in it. Shad was in it.
Oh, really?
Yeah. Melissa Chambers was in it. So, yeah, it was... I noticed that throughout the series, they've actually had a few hints here and there that they were... The Absaroka County and the Absaroka Mountains were considered for a treasure hunt.
For the treasure hunt.
Yeah.
So they pulled some of the themes from it to make it into the show. Yeah, Longmire is filmed here in New Mexico. I don't know how much you guys know about the film industry in New Mexico. It is a leading income provider in the state, and we have a lot of friends that work in the industry because as documentary makers, we'd sometimes partner with them and sometimes work with them. But we know a lot of the people that appear. It's always fun to watch a program like Longmire or one of the other things. What was the one your daughter was in about? The Manhattan Project. Shelly's daughter was in that, so we'd watch it every week. And I'd call Shelly and I'd say, I just saw Alicia. She was really cute as a 1940s housewife. Yeah, yeah. So we have a lot of friends that in the industry, and we get to see a lot. Shelly's been in several. What was the last thing? You did Independence Day, didn't you?
I did. It was interesting.
The second one.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Actually, I still didn't
Think
see
about
the
that.
movie.
Independence Day. I
still haven't seen it.
Independence Day Resurgent, that high-tech movie, was filmed here in New Mexico.
Mostly in studio, and it was pretty interesting because there's a giant warehouse of a studio, and then they have the blue screen all the way around so that they could make it look like it was Washington, D.C. in the mall area.
Yeah.
So I wanted to see it just to see
how they made it. Yeah.
Oh, okay, we were in a studio for that.
I almost downloaded it for my trip and decided that I didn't do it.
Did something else.
Yeah.
Okay. So enough said about that, I think.
Yeah, we did say we'd answer any questions. So
These guys are talking to themselves a little bit.
all right.
Oh, and Jan Kerb says Longmire is the season 6, episode 2 is the one with the treasure hunter episode. But they do mostly focus on the murder and all of that. But it's kind of cool that they include the treasure poem and everything.
Well, thankfully it wasn't a story about a lost searcher.
Well, actually, it was.
Oh, it was?
But I can't tell you how it ends because that would spoil it.
Yeah, okay.
Forrest, then he wants to find... Forrest says, okay, James Jones, Forrest says that he wants to find the edges and be challenged. Is your questioning strategy fit for that purpose?
Yes, absolutely, because the idea is to go in with a set of questions that you want answers to, and then to use his responses to those questions as a mechanism to broaden the envelope, right? Push him further and further out to the edge, while still maintaining a personal level of credibility, because the last thing that you want to do, again, unless this is a confrontational interview, the last thing that you want to do is irritate your subject. You want to stay as much as you can on a friendly basis, and you have to be very good at understanding where the edge is for them, because there's nothing that will shut an interview down faster as pushing them over that edge. But it's perfectly reasonable for that if you start with questions and then use the answers to those questions to start doing a little bit of pushing. Again, you shouldn't change your open-ended questioning strategy. You should continue to do that, but you should also be listening, and that's why it's always important to record these conversations so that you can focus on the responses, not making notes, but focus on the responses, develop questions based on the responses. And a lot of times when you're doing that, because your mind doesn't work that way, a lot of times you're so focused on figuring out what the next question is that you don't always hear that response. You just hear the portion that's important enough to stimulate the next question. So it's always important to have a recorder with you when you're conducting these interviews. And a good digital recorder will cost you $150, and you know, I carry one all the time. Shelly carries one all the time, because you never know exactly when you're going to run into this kind of opportunity. Record it.
Or you get one on your phone too.
That's true. Yeah, like our friend Thomas. Yeah, he flips out his phone and he starts recording the conversation.
From David Dow, do you know how we can view the Lure documentary? I believe Thomas Leach still has that out in film festivals, so he would not put it up online unless there's just absolutely no further way to get it out into festivals or get any money for it.
Yeah. So Thomas is going through the process of trying to recover as much money as he can from the film, because he funded it pretty much himself. I know he did have some investment, but he's got to get some money back. And the way that you do that is by getting noticed at film festivals and hoping it generates other opportunity, whether or not it's on the same topic. And he's not past that yet. He's still, as Shelly said, working the film festivals. So the likelihood, I mean, I don't know. It has a relatively limited life. I don't think it's the kind of thing that you can hold on to for 3 years. But it's got to go. Somebody at a film festival is going to see it, recommend some edits, and then put it into some kind of release. I don't know when that is. I don't think that Thomas knows when that is. Mm-hmm. So I'm not sure. And he hasn't put it up, I think. Go back to the interview that Shelly did with him, and I think he mentioned the possibility that it might go on one of the online distributors like Netflix or Amazon Video, something like that. That's possible. Like I said, he's got to generate some revenue from it somehow, mm-hmm. and that's an easy way to do it.
If we hear anything, we'll certainly let everybody know. Yeah,
right. I can write Thomas and ask a question. He's going to respond to us because he was very grateful. He uses our interview as a tool for his marketing.
Here's you a yes or no question.
Oh.
From Caryl Ferguson. Toby, did you know that there is a U.S. naval ship named Cimarron that served during Vietnam?
No, but I will look it up. Because I was in the Army.
From E.S. Forrest, yeah, but your son was in the Navy. Oh,
true,
not that he was in
during
Vietnam. No. Yes, Forrest has written the poem to encourage people to experience nature. Has he ever said that the treasure is in nature as opposed to an urban area?
So Forrest, I don't think so. I think he avoids that. I think he uses metaphors and inspirational quotes. You know, my church is in the mountains and the river bottoms, et cetera, et cetera. He has never said it is not in an urban area, but he has also never said that it is in Montana, Wyoming, Colorado, or New Mexico. So I'm not surprised by that. I think you can interpret what he has said thus far. He's never, to the best of my knowledge, recommended that somebody take the children's little texting machines away from them and take them out to play, basketball in a playground. I don't think Forrest, in my opinion, is more in tune with nature than he is with the urban environment. I'm not actually that way. I love the natural environment, the outside of urban, but I'm very much in tune. I like New York City. I like Washington, D.C. I'm very much in tune with an urban environment, but I enjoy being out in a non-urban environment. I don't see him doing that. I don't. He's never said it, but I don't see him implying that either.
I think the closest would be when he said, if I was standing where the treasure was, I would see pine trees. I would see
He would smell pignon, which he had to take back a couple of days later.
Well, I know that.
Because nobody I know smells pignon.
But he said he would see these
roasting.
things, right?
Yeah.
The
birds and animals.
The animals.
It's one of the tests we use.
Right. Shane McLaughlin, do you think Forrest Fenn hid the treasure in a public, semi-public place? That's why maybe he laughed to himself on the way back to his car. Also, maybe it is why a child has an advantage.
Well, I suppose it depends what you mean by public versus semi-public, because I think, you know, if you look at our solution where you have to drive down the Cimarron, the road that goes down Cimarron Canyon, and then you have to pull off the canyon road and go off the road by about 200 feet, that's a public road. And I'm in an area that is effectively a state park, and it's a public state park, and we do see people there. It's not a private area. So I think it depends on what your definition of public is. Is it on, Forrest has said, I believe Forrest had said, that it's on lands that belong to the people. The implication being that it is on public lands. Public lands can be BLM lands, and if you've ever been on some of the BLM lands, you're pretty far out in the boonies. You're not near civilization by any stretch of the imagination for a lot of the BLM lands. And that to me has always been the most likely, simply because the whole process of hiding and retrieving on BLM lands is a lot less complex than for any other location, including state parks, federal monuments, or national monuments, and private or tribal land, which I don't believe it is on. I don't believe it's on private or tribal land. The complexities, the ownership complexities just don't make sense. But I do not think it is public in the sense. Well, let's go back to the special place concept. If, as an adult, you establish a special place and you're enamored with nature, that special place is going to be relatively private in the sense that it's going to be off the beaten path. And I believe that's true. I believe that Fenn's special place and the place that he hid the treasure is off the beaten path. It could very well be in the middle of Cimarron Canyon, which is a state forest, or Yellowstone National Park, which is a national park. So I think it depends how you define public. Is it near a, you know, there's I'm going to use an example of, say, the Gettysburg National Park and monuments. That if you want to go to a busy national park, go to Gettysburg. The traffic during the summer is amazing. It's not in any place that generates that much traffic. And Yellowstone has recently had the tendency to do that. Yellowstone over the summer months is highly trafficked. It would be difficult in Yellowstone to isolate yourself from the number of people that populate Yellowstone. I don't think of Yellowstone as, well, Yellowstone's a big place too. You can get off the beaten path. But I think of Yellowstone as far more public than I do our solution, which is the Cimarron Canyon. And we do see a lot of people there, you know.
Okay. From Cindy Guess, I recently asked Forrest, have you ever told anyone that Home of Brown is not related to brown trout? He did not answer. AGK, have you ever come across someone saying this, that it's not related to brown trout? Well, and again, you could infer pretty much anything, whether he'd answered yes or no.
Yeah, when Forrest doesn't answer, the worst thing for you is to ask a question that Forrest doesn't answer, because it is in our nature to assume that, and I just saw this on the news, I can't remember the question. Somebody was asked a question, they avoided the answer, and the conclusion was, well, they avoided the answer is because the answer is true, or something like that. It was completely, so I think when Forrest doesn't, if you ask a question, and if you wrote it the same way that you described, that's a yes-no question. He could have easily responded, I don't know. And he would have given you the answer that question would have naturally elicited. At the same time, I think one of the things that you can't do is that if you ask a question and it's not a poorly constructed question, or that it is a poorly constructed question, and he doesn't answer, you can't assume that that's an answer, right? Not answering is just that. It's not answering. And it could be not answering for a whole bunch of different reasons, as opposed to, well, I didn't want to confirm what you told me. You know, I didn't. So you asked about brown being associated with brown trout, and he didn't answer. So nature, not just you, but all of us will go, oh, yeah, it must be that he didn't answer that question, therefore it must be the brown trout.
And if you want to dissect the question, you're asking, have you ever told anyone? So.
Oh, yeah. See, you just gave him a whole bunch of room not to answer the question, because it's like I tell people that I hid the treasure when I was 80. Have you ever told anyone this? I already know that you're trying to confirm not what I feel about it, but what I did with someone, whether or not I've actually said that. That's an easy one, not even to answer without it. And the answer is, I'm not going to answer that. And it doesn't mean necessarily that it has anything to do with brown trout. That was not confirmation that the homo brown has anything to do with brown trout. That's not how I would interpreted the lack of response.
Yeah, he'll go with whether or not he's actually told somebody.
He'll go
that.
Whatever is the easiest for him.
Absolutely. All right.
And I've noticed, the other thing that I've noticed is over the past, I'm going to say year, maybe longer so, his answers to even the most well-composed questions are getting progressively shorter. Again, I think this has to do with the level of tolerance, level of intolerance increasing for him.
Either that or he launches into a story about something completely different.
Yeah.
So AJ21, what do you think, what do you think about, I'm not quite sure how this is phrased. What do you think about the Colorado-New Mexico border could be where warm water halts?
There are several rivers that cross flowing south from Colorado into New Mexico. The Rio Costilla is one of them. The Rio Grande is one of them. And because the warm water regulations from the Game and Fish Department and at the border effectively, the warm waters halt. As a matter of fact, one of the definitions of where warm waters halt is the border, the Colorado border, because the Rio Grande from the Colorado border down to the Taos Junction Bridge are trout waters, are specialty trout waters. So that's one case where warm waters, the border does halt, if you believe that the Game and Fish Department definition of warm waters is accurate. So we've researched that, and if you go back to one of our old videos, we talked about the 8 places where warm waters halt in the rivers in northern New Mexico. And I think 2 or 3 of them, Costilla, Rio Grande, and there was one at San Miguel. Those 3 all halt, warm waters halt at the Colorado border.
Brian Schultz just donated to Super Chat. Thank you, Brian.
Thank you. Does he have a question, or was that just a Christmas present?
Just must be Christmas.
Yay.
Because it's Christmas. Okay, this is from ES, Toby or Shelly. Do you plan on getting Cynthia's book on her experiences in her quest for the treasure? I didn't even know about it.
Yeah, actually what stimulated it is some of those questions that I was using as examples were the ones that were asked by Mysterious Writings of Cynthia.
Oh.
And it was they did talk about her book. That's a good question. I have seen, so this is going to sound critical. Read the question again.
Okay. Do you plan on getting Cynthia's book on her experiences in her quest for the treasure?
No.
Okay. And I didn't either, because I didn't even know about it. Shane McLaughlin, why are there 3 versions of the poem? Also, why does everything revolve around brown? Literally, the color itself in the poem and in the book.
For me to answer that why question would require me to interpret what you believe about the poem and what you believe about
3 versions?
There was the version that preceded the conversations with Douglas Preston. There was the one that Douglas Preston saw sometime in the early 2000s, and then there was the one that ended up in the book. There are probably more than 3 versions, based on how I know Fenn operates. But the why in that is I don't have any answer for that. I couldn't tell you why there are 3 versions, other than any good writer who was trying to do what Fenn was trying to do would have written potentially an infinite number of versions until he got it. What was published was the version of the poem that was exactly right.
Anything about Brown that you want to address?
Brown is interesting because I think for me, as a fine arts major, it's color. So it's hard for me to think of Brown as grizzlies or any of these other things. So it's hard for me to answer that.
We do go into that in that video.
Yeah.
About the color brown.
The color brown. Lignite.
Lignite.
Van Dyke Brown.
Van Dyke Brown.
How are we doing?
We're getting low on time, but we still have more questions. So
I'm not worried. I'm not worried about time. I'm worried about the batteries.
Oh well, when make mention of that.
Okay. Okay. So here's the deal. We're using our large 500 watt LED lights that use each one uses these 2 huge Sony batteries, and they're good when I put the Sony batteries in. They're good for anywhere from 4 to 7 hours, depending on how high the intensity is. And actually, these are down. I don't think I turned them up. Hold on. Because I had them down for, nice and bright you were. I had them down for DJ, because she wanted to look pretty.
Well, I want to look pretty too.
Okay, well, we're doing that now. So anyway, we decided today we would go until you ran out of questions, or until the batteries on the lights died, whichever comes first.
Bob Shopman. Why do you feel that the chest is not west of the Rio Grande? Example, Chama area.
That's another one of those why questions, huh?
Why do you feel that way?
And why do I feel that way?
Your feelings.
Why do I feel that way? I feel that way because I don't, as having been born and raised in Santa Fe, I never thought of that area, interesting though it is, as the mountains north of Santa Fe. When I was growing up and somebody told me I was going in the mountains north of Santa Fe, I knew we were there going towards Taos and then west of Taos, Eagle Nests, Angel Fire, Cimarron, or into the Pecos. If somebody said, let's go west, then I knew we were going to the Jemez or Chama or Northwest. The New Mexico state maps that the recreational maps don't even call that north; they call that northwest. So it just.
We also discussed it when we talked about the Rocky Mountains didn't go any further than the Rio Grande.
West of the Rio Grande. So there's some new material out from the U.S. Geological Service that indicates, geologically speaking, where the Rocky Mountains are. And although they are further west than the east bank of the Rio Grande, they are not as far west as Chama. And so it just doesn't. Again, you asked me why I feel that way. I feel that way because to me, those aren't the mountains north of Santa Fe.
Joshua Formanek, can someone find the treasure in Cimarron Canyon and keep it, or will the state take the treasure away?
The state has the same problem that the national public lands have, and that is it really depends what kind of land is it. It's a state. It's not exactly a state park. I can't remember what it is, but it falls into the same category as Yellowstone. And so if you decide that you want to inform someone where you found the treasure, there are going to be certain situations where your attorneys will spend all your treasure getting your treasure back from the federal or state government.
Which is why we said we would not tell anybody where we found it.
Right. Which is why you just need to avoid telling anyone where you found the treasure. And if you decide you don't want to do that, and Fenn is still living when that happens, he's as much as promised that he'll do what the finder wants. So he's not going to tell anybody where it is, and I guarantee you he'll have a lot of fun he'll have as much fun not telling people where the treasure was as he has not telling us where the treasure is. Yeah, yeah. So the best thing you can do is avoid the situation. You have title to the treasure. You don't need anyone's permission to own it. So the last thing that you should do is tell the state of New Mexico or the United States. And you should know by now that I'm a big believer in the government. I'm not an anti-government kind of guy. I served the government for most of my career. But I'm not going to tell the government where I found the treasure if we find that treasure. And I highly recommend that you don't either. There's no need to. There's no requirement for you to do that. Don't do it. Because you'll just end up in court.
World famous gamer. Forrest said he felt like an architect drawing the poem. My question is, why aren't people's solves involving drawing or using numbers like architects do?
You know, interestingly enough, one of my daughters and her husband are both architects. And one time, and her husband is especially intellectual. You know, he's got one of these 140 plus IQs. And they're both very good at design work, although when the market fell out in 2009, they were smart enough to go look for something else to do. One time, this subject came up when we were doing some research on that whole concept of architect, aviator, all of that. And I asked my son, the intellectual architect, not that my daughter isn't, but this is something that he's thought about. I asked him, what discipline is architecture most like? And he said, poetry. And I thought that was a damned interesting response without any kind of preamble that indicated why I was even asking the question. So I asked him to expand upon that, and he said it's the closest to what an architect does in terms of three-dimensional manipulation. Architects, when you ask them what they do, they tell you they enclose space. And in terms of that space, the most vivid part of how they see it is this convergence of three dimensions. We have a very good friend whose name is Antoine Predock. Antoine Predock. He's literally the architect of our time. He lives right here in Albuquerque. He does some really beautiful buildings. Google his images on Antoine Predock, Predock. And he has the most amazing perspective. He's constantly winning his awards. He's in his 80s now, I think. He was part of a documentary that we were doing.
He's just recovering from a motorcycle accident.
Yeah. He spends a lot of time. He
just gave his house to UNM, by the way.
Oh, he did?
Yeah.
The one over here on 12th?
Mm-hmm.
Wow.
Well, it said downtown. That's the house on 12th, right?
Yeah.
So he gave that to UNM as part of the College of Architecture.
Oh, cool.
So all of his materials.
That's where we interviewed him. We interviewed him at his house, and he has this beautiful house. But what's more interesting is what's inside the house, because he's an avid collector. He's also he has this a collection of motorcycles that include a Vincent Black Shadow. So that's the kind of guy he is. Anyway, we became friends because we were interviewing him for a documentary that we were working on called Caffeine and Gasoline. And he's a master of enclosing space in beautiful and amazing and unique and unusual ways. Look him up online. But if you look at what they do, they're in constant manipulation of three-dimensional space. You know who else does that? An aviator. An Air Force pilot or a naval aviator are constantly imagining things in terms of three-dimensional space. Poetry is the ability to imagine things in multiple dimensions. And I think that's how you have to look at the whole architectural component rather than numbers and lines and blueprints. I don't think it's numbers and lines and blueprints. I think it's the ability to imagine in a three-dimensional space, maybe more than three, because I think in Fenn's case, we have to consider the potential for time, which is a fourth dimension and all of that. But I think that whole architectural thing is a good place to go.
I think Shane McLaughlin is trying to give us a little additional information about his question about the three formats.
Yeah.
He said 3 versions of Word formats. Did Forrest Fenn pick those Word formats, or was it recommended?
I don't know the answer to that question.
Is that just the way it's written, the way it looks? Word formats? not quite sure we're understanding.
I'm sorry. A, I'm not sure I'm understanding, and B, I'm not sure I understand. I know the answer to the question.
So Chris Bischoff.
That wasn't a
no,
super chat?
That was Shane McLaughlin.
Because I tried to answer the super chat once when I can.
Yeah. Chris Bischoff. So we've come to the conclusion he rented a car, right? That's a leading question.
I don't know.
We haven't come to that conclusion, I don't think.
We have not come to that conclusion. We did, in our lander recon, considered it as a possibility because it was lander and because we believe he flew there and he would have had to rent a car. But after the whole Avis rental thing fell apart, one has to ask yourself, man, maybe he just jumped in his car in his driveway one afternoon. And, you know, I don't know that I can answer that question with credibility. I still don't know yet.
Okay, Shane McLaughlin said cursive versus English. That's two different things.
Those are two different things. Cursive is a style of font, and English is a language. So I still don't know. I'm sorry.
Hydromaker says our website is down.
What?
I don't know.
A gypsy's could try a gypsy's kiss. A gypsy with plural. Possessive. A gypsyskiss.com. Unless you all went there at once, but
well, we'll take a look at that as soon as we're done here. So AJ21 says, "Can you give me a percentage of all 4 states which has the higher likelihood of having the treasure?"
Wow. So I'm going to give you 2 answers to that question. The first answer is based on my opinion, and the second answer is based on logic. My opinion is that it's 100% in New Mexico. So the other states are 0. But if I were to apply some form of logic, which could include reading all the books and determining where his fascination was, I would say 35% New Mexico, 45%. So this is hard because so I would say 35% New Mexico, 45% someplace around northern Wyoming, the Wyoming-Montana border, you know, that area, not necessarily each state. I think that has a higher probability. And then the balance, what is it, 25, 35 Colorado. Is, what am I at, 60? Okay, so 35% New Mexico, 30% Montana, 30% Wyoming, and the balance in Colorado. I think Colorado is the least likely, least probable.
Which is why we're going to the Denver Museum.
The Denver, so I want to make a point. We are going to the Denver Museum, but I think I said this earlier. That does not change our opinion that the treasure is in New Mexico. We believe there is a clue inside the Denver Museum that's going to substantiate our solution.
Carol Ferguson says, actually, when one Googles poetry, architects actually comes up. I don't know. I don't know how that works, but okay, I'll take your word for it. AJ Rainville, you've previously said that there's a 50-50 chance the chest is never found. What is your opinion on the % chance the chest is found, but the finder never goes public with it?
Oh, so you're asking a hypothetical.
A percentage based on a hypothetical.
So there's a big difference between going public and going public, but so there's 3 different layers, right? So one is not going public. I think there's a very low probability of that unless the finder of the treasure is a complete idiot. And the reason is, I think, not sorry, did I do that wrong?
The finder would not go public?
The finder, well, that's the thing. So one thing is to not go public, meaning they never say the treasure has found. You would have to be an idiot not to make that announcement, right? Somehow.
Right. You want to tell people because
there's 3 things. 2 things. Do you tell people, do you inform the world the treasure has been found? Yes. Because I think if you don't, you establish a point of liability for yourself, right? And my friends who are attorneys have confirmed that. There's another question, and that is, do you tell people not where the treasure is found? Yes, you tell people that the treasure is found. You don't have to tell people where the treasure was found, right? So those are two different things. And I think that it is a very low probability that someone would not say in some form or the other, they don't have to put themselves out in public, our plan is to send an anonymous email to the New York Times with photographs of the treasure saying it's been found. And we're doing that to ensure that we're not liable for anything that happens after that point, whether it's angry searchers or injuries or deaths. But at the same time, we are not going to say where the treasure is found or that we found it. Those are three different things.
Well, it's not a question, but he says it's an early, world-famous gamer. Here's an early Christmas present. Is it possible Yellowstone on the map, which is written in purple, could be the home of brown? Yellow and purple makes brown.
Somebody's been messing with their Easter eggs. Because it's true, when you do an Easter egg and you do it like purple and yellow, it comes out brown.
Chris Durbridge.
Wait, what do you mean by Easter egg? No, I'm just kidding.
Fenn talks a lot about crossing park boundaries, rules, old biddies, teasing him that he is not allowed to cross the street, not being able to drive to the lake. Do you think this theme is a hint?
I don't. It could very well be the idea that Fenn perceives himself as a rule breaker. He doesn't like being, and he especially perceives himself as a rule breaker when he's been told he can't do that. When somebody has told him he can't do something, then you can be assured he's going to break that rule at all costs. At the same time, he has to consider, and he said more than once that he hired attorneys to figure this out for him. He's got to consider that this isn't about him. Once this treasure is found, Forrest Fenn as a icon goes away. What becomes important after the treasure is found is A, the treasure and what happens to it, and B, the person who finds the treasure and what happens to them. Now, some people don't care to have anything happen to them. They'll be happy with the treasure has been found, and then they can monetize it in however they want, or they can, we've had this, look at the video on where we said what we're going to do if we find the treasure. But I don't think, if Fenn broke the rules, I don't think he broke the laws with the expectation that the finder would be left with the same choices. I don't think he wants the finder to break laws. I think he expects that the finder will break even some physical and metaphysical rules without putting themselves in danger, right? So even to that extent, it's not in a mine, for example. He doesn't want you looking in mines. So there might have been a rule that said, hey, I have pictures from Horseshoe Mine up in Cimarron. It's not in there. And he didn't tell me, of course, until it was later, and I ended up walking out with literally bugs hanging on to me.
I saw that hole in the rock, and I can't believe you went in there.
Yeah, it was pretty interesting. I can't believe people are still mining that, is what's amazing to me. Oh. There's still markings in there that indicate people are mining. So, yeah, I don't think, I think he has boundaries that he enjoys breaking through, but I don't get a sense that he wants you to break the laws, whether they're physical, natural, or a byproduct of what the government asks you not to do.
Okay. I think that's it.
Oops. Wow.
Oh, wait, one more.
You want to go back and make sure you got them?
Spurious effect. Could you announce the find anonymously and then just leave it up to Forrest whether to disclose his secret spot or not?
You could. So here's our plan, because I've already written the email. I'll tell you what we're going to do about it. So we have anonymous emails and addresses of people at the New York Times who are going to send an anonymous email and bleached images to let them know that A, the treasure has been found, B, to inform Mr. Fenn that the treasure has been found, and C, to inform Mr. Fenn that we want to maintain A, our anonymity, and any other information about finding the treasure. Fenn has as much as committed to the idea that whatever the finder wants, he'll go along with. So if you don't want to tell the world where you found the treasure, in my opinion, I don't think Forrest will tell the world either. And I think we've already worked out his answer. If we decide that Fenn, that we don't want to indicate where the treasure was found, and somebody asks Fenn, where did you hide the treasure? His response is going to be, I can predict for you. His response to be is where Toby and Shelly found it. Yep, assuming, of course.
Well, actually, he'll probably say, read the poem.
Yeah.
Because that's what he tells everybody now.
Yeah.
Read the poem, they'll figure it out.
Or where those guys in the New York Times say they found it, because those are pictures of the treasure I hid. Yeah. So make sure you bleach them so you don't have any metadata, so they can't determine where the pictures are from.
And I don't think he wants to share his spot if he doesn't have to.
You know, and then that as a question goes away when he passes.
Yeah.
Anyway, so because he's the only one that knows where hit it, and it's no one else is going to come out and say, well, we're happy to hear that the treasure has been found, and okay, it's done.
So Shane has a couple of questions.
Yay.
What do you think is the extra item in the chest that Forrest Fenn refuses to disclose?
I don't know. And he has a reason for not disclosing it. I don't know why he would not disclose it. He's talked about everything else. It could very well be that there is no item in the chest that doesn't require disclosure.
Well, Caryl Ferguson had an answer earlier. She said she thought it would be directions to contact his attorneys.
I can't imagine he would do that with the expectation that somebody who knows and understands treasure finding, not treasure hunting, would do that anyway. Because I would not contact attorneys. I just wouldn't do that. There's no reason to do that. You own the treasure. The title has been given to you in the poem, and you can do with it what. And there is digital video recordings of Fenn saying that the treasure belongs to the finder. And he hid it, and that it belongs to his finder. He reinforces that in the first, fifth, and sixth stanzas of the poem.
And the more quiet you are about it, the less trouble you're going to have keeping it or selling it.
Exactly. And you're going to spend less time in court.
And he says, Shane again says, do you think the first clue or the first two clues could have you start at a location outside of the boundaries of the chosen states, then the rest of the clues lead you into the spot?
I think that's possible. I don't know probability-wise whether it's probable. I think it's possible because I think one of the solutions that I've seen is the one that starts in Utah at the it's a reservoir. It has a fire something reservoir. And it starts in Utah, canyon down, leads you into that area of Colorado where Dinosaur Monument is, and where Butch Cassidy was, and the home of the
Brown's Hole?
Brown's Hole, yeah. So I think it is possible, and it could be very creative because one of our solution actually starts in Colorado and crosses the border into New Mexico. So, yes, I think it's possible. On a probability thing, I'd say it's 20% probability.
Let's see. Caryl Ferguson, do you think that the reference to horseshoes could refer to the shape of Indian pueblos?
So not all Native American Indian Puebloans, they're not shaped like that. Most of their shapes are, for example, if you use the example of Chaco Canyon, they're U-shapes, closed U-shapes rather than horseshoe shapes. and their layout is very much associated with astronomical phenomenon like the movement of the sun and the moon. The story about the horseshoes is one of those aberrations that we talked about. It was so out of place in terms of the rest of that chapter that I believe to myself that it must have some kind of it could contribute in the hint. I don't think it's a clue, but a lot of those hints from the perspective of the aberrations, as he calls them, to me are more associated with locations that are more, Horseshoe Mine, for example, rather than the Native American. The Native American, they don't have that concept of horseshoe, and they don't have that shape in their architecture. The shape is actually an open or a closed U rather than it is a horseshoe. That omega shape.
Okay.
Oh, sorry, I didn't mean omega. Don't even start with me on the whole omega thing.
I don't know. Bud Snow, Forrest Fenn has said that he knows without a doubt that the treasure has not been found yet, but he won't disclose how he knows. Do you have any thoughts on how he knows?
That it hasn't been found.
Right.
I believe that he's going to rely on the simple fact that the person who finds the treasure will have a very difficult time keeping the fact that the treasure has been found quiet. And whether or not they do it publicly or anonymously, I think his expectation is that whomever finds the treasure will let the world know that the treasure has been found. Some of those people will let the world know that they found the treasure, that it was they who had found the treasure, and some of those people will let the world know where they found it. We're in category 1. We found the treasure, but we're not making an announcement. I think that's what he's relying on. I don't think I've figured out I've worked on all the possibilities, including the action necessary to contact attorneys or his heirs, or he's got something digital and mechanical and or technical in there. It doesn't work. His hope. If you look at the kind of person he is, his hope is that somebody would do the right thing and let the world know the treasure has been found. I don't think there's anything more to it than that.
Let's see. Chris Durbridge, do you think year-round weather was an important determination in his choice of a final resting place?
No. I think the solutions that we look at in the Rocky Mountains above 5,000 feet have 4 seasons. And I think he realized that the search season was, depending on how far south you were, from May to October. The further north, it was shorter than that, but I think that was okay with him. I don't think Fenn put it in a location that had, it wasn't Boca Raton, where the temperature always seems to be in the high 80s, or San Diego, where the temperature is always 72. All done?
No. Just reading through. So, David Dow, do you feel Warm Waters Halt has a hint in the thrill of the chase? Otherwise, there are thousands of where Warm Waters halt in the Rockies. There is only one that counts.
Well, I think that's the key, right? If you're a little girl in India, you have to reduce it to what that first clue is. And the idea is that if you're looking for thousands of Warm Waters Halt, and then you have 8 other clues to resolve after that, then you have permutations that are monstrous. I mean, in numbers, you're not going to be able to do all the permutations in one lifetime or multiple lifetimes. So the best thing to do is reduce your Warm Waters Halt to a single definition, to a single state. And then work from there. And once you've done that, then go to a second definition of Warm Waters Halt. We have said more than once, and people who watch our show know that we believe that Warm Waters Halt refers to the New Mexico State Game and Fish fishing regulations definition of warm waters. It's plural. It's there. It's easily defined, and you can find those locations easily on a map. Well, it's going to take me probably 3 or 4 search seasons to go to every one of those locations and go from there. But at least I have an exact place to go, because honestly, even if that little Indian girl can't go to the exact location of where warm water salt, where you're just guessing, where it seems like, well, is this, and I'm not going to be critical here, but you hear a lot of warm waters is the confluence of cold waters and hot waters, and et cetera, et cetera. And so now you have this definition, this arbitrary definition of what it is and exactly where that occurs and what the temperature of warm versus cold versus hot is. Their warm water salt has to be an exact geologically precise location. Geographically precise location. What did I say? Geologically. I'm sorry. Where warm water salt has to be a geographically precise location, because if you don't have an accurate starting point, you're just walking in the woods. And I can tell you there are hundreds of thousands of searches done by people, including me, who have gone to that arbitrary warm water salt, and two things are going to happen. Number one, the minute you're out there, your whole solution falls apart. You just start going like, well, that's pretty close, like that.
Then you start justifying everything.
Then you start justifying everything.
Well, it could be this tree.
Yeah, exactly.
We've always said it's not a tree, but maybe this time.
Yeah. So until you can pinpoint where exactly warm water salt, you probably shouldn't even waste your time going boots on the ground, unless you just like Forrest Fenn, like being in nature. The advantage to our definition of where warm water salt in New Mexico, using the Game and Fish Department regulations, is that those points are exact. I can take a picture of the place on the Cimarron River at the eastern edge of the Tobe campground, in line with the eastern edge of the Tobe campground, that is exact to a pinpoint. There aren't a lot of other definitions of warm water salt that can do that, and that leaves you in a quagmire of variables and permutations, and you'll spend a lot of time walking around in the forest. It's a nice place, take pictures, but it's a lot of walking for nothing.
Might be special for you.
Yeah.
Magnetic universe.
That's why we recommend, the minute you have what you believe is a credible solution, put boots on the ground if you haven't before this, because boots on the ground is the most revealing action you're going to take. You're going to realize this is a lot bigger problem than I thought it was, no matter how far you've gotten in the poem.
Magnetic universe. Did Forrest first stumble upon the treasure location from the air?
Ooh. Okay, so that's a yes/no, right? But I'm going to answer it anyway. I don't think he found it from the air. I think you travel enough. If you're like him and you fly, he loved flying low over the Rocky Mountains. I think what you'd do is you'd look for places that met his criteria. But I think the special place, when he found the special place, I think generally he had an idea that he was going to be, in the forests and the river bottoms and the pine trees and all that. But in my opinion, I believe the special place became special purely by accident. I think something happened in that moment at Forrest Fenn the adult, that happened to Forrest Fenn the adult, that he realized was absolutely unique, and in a unique location, and someplace where, that's why I feel like the blaze is so important. The blaze is close to his special place. The blaze doesn't coincide with his special place, but I think what happened is he discovered the blaze and then may have looked for a place where he could hide his treasure, and when he was first doing this, hide his body as well. So no, I don't think he found it from the air. I think he saw the possibilities from the air, but I think the special place became special the moment that that the universe intervened.
Mr. G, what do you feel the level of interest in the Fenn hunt is now compared to years past? Do you foresee future interest growing or declining?
Declining, and the reason is the population is aging and becoming more frustrated, and and it's not cheap. If you believe that it's someplace in the Rocky Mountains, the advantage we have, one of the advantages that we have in believing it's in New Mexico, is we can day trip or weekend trip out and not spend thousands of dollars. Other people who are searching, I mean, we did a trip to Lander this last season, and between the three of us, Shelly, her husband, and I, we probably spent $2,000 to $3,000. Huh? You think? I mean, it turned into big numbers.
Week.
Yeah, a week.
But we shared the cost, so
yeah.
It wasn't so bad.
It wasn't so bad. It was a lot, it wasn't as bad as that.
We drove, we didn't fly. So.
But I think I lost my train of thought. I'm sorry.
Oh, well, what do you feel the level of interest in the Fenn hit is now, and do you think it's going to grow or decline?
Yeah, I think it's lower than it was when The Thrill of the Chase came out. I think everything will, just by the nature of human beings, will tend to decline. Interest will decline. Purchases of the books will decline. Fewer and fewer people will go out. They're getting older. It was an older population to begin with. The treasure hunt is not, occasionally you'll see a story about younger people going out, but for the most part, they're mature and older people, average ages in the late 50s, So I think the interest is going to decline. And for those of us that are going to continue right up until we die 10 feet away from the treasure chest,
Isn't it ironic?
Isn't it? That would be. The treasure was found by this guy who died right next to it, so.
Well, as intended.
So I think the interest will continue to decline. I think the state of the treasure, we did a show on this a couple of weeks ago, and I think that, to me, in my opinion, the level of frustration and almost anger, disappointment maybe, is out there, and it's much higher than I had seen in years past. It's creating a lot of, I think there's a lot of consternation. So. This year is a lot more negative than I had seen in previous years at the end of search season, because each year somebody says, oh, this is the year I'm going to find it, or somebody's going to find it, and this is the year solution. And honestly, and I can only state this as an opinion, I don't think anybody's any closer to, and we said this in our show, I don't think anybody's closer to finding that treasure than we were 5, 6, 7 years ago. I still think that Stephanie, 30 Acre, was closest, and nobody's been closer since. So, declining.
Yeah. And a lot of people, well, they go out 1 or 2 times, more or less, and they kind of give up, and then they make up reasons why they didn't find it, and they share those reasons with everybody. Oh, well, Forrest has gone back and gotten it, or somebody else found it. See, here's the hole. Yeah. So they come up with all of these reasons, and then they share that, and they add to the lore that there isn't any reason to keep looking. So it does,
because it's not out there.
Yeah, it does. Yeah. It adds that into the mix.
Fundamentally, we believe he hid a treasure, and that the treasure is still out there, because if neither of those conditions were true, it would be irrational for us to even consider looking for it. We'd be wasting our time, and that's, when I'm at my age, that wasting time is not something I want to do.
Well, then we better quit answering these questions.
No, we're not wasting time. I'm having fun. This is like the best part of my day for my brain, because it gives me a...
Okay, brain dump. BJ Chambly, do you think Forrest wants to be able to show the genius of the architectural design of the poem clue by clue before he passes?
Forrest's personality, the answer to that question is he did once. I don't think he wants to anymore. I think there was a point at which he was hoping he'd reach a level of admiration for how much effort he had put into constructing, to architecting, and engineering to some extent this poem. But I think he's past that. I think I think that wears on an individual. I think it's worn on him. So I don't think it's true anymore, but I think there was a point in time where, people looking at the poem and saying, oh my God, this is so complex. How did he do this? And I'm sure one day we'll all look at it. I'm sure one day we'll do the one of two things that humans are wanted to do. We'll either look at it and say, wow, the treasure's been found. And they'll say, wow, that poem was so complex. It was amazing how he put that all together. Now that we know where it was found, if somebody decides they want to do that. Or we'll do like, really? It was that easy? That recent breakfast tea and bourbon was, when people announced where they had found the treasure, like half the people that were searching said, I was there. I literally, I was within 200 feet and walked right past it, kind of thing. And then when they said, well, we kind of felt it was there too, but we missed it the first time and went back. There's going to be a lot of that soul searching of why didn't I was within 10 feet of it, so.
And that's the thing about walking through the forest. You can be 10 feet from something, and unless it's making a sound.
Right.
I don't know.
Bear spray.
I was talking about the stream that we heard in the distance.
I'm talking about bears.
Is there, AJ21 wants to know, is there any connection between Indian culture and the poem?
Yes, only because I think Fenn, there's a lot of Fenn in the poem. And Fenn was a collector of artifacts. He had an interest in anthropology, archaeology, history. So I think all of those things are definitely in the poem. And I think he's just that kind of guy. And honestly, the reason I want to go to the Denver Museum is because a lot of those topics of nature and science, or science and nature, I can never remember which order it is. I even put it wrong in my post. Because a lot of those subjects are covered there. And I could see where visiting the Denver Museum of Science and Nature could be something, A, that he did, and B, recognized something in there that was close to his heart because he had a lot of interest. I don't know whether you went to our blog when I got back from Florida after visiting my new granddaughter. I posted an image that I found in the Frost Museum of Science in Miami, and I asked everybody to guess what it was. It turned out to be a chart, a navigation chart. It's called a stick chart, and it was used by the Marshall Islanders to guide their sailors from one island to the next using the wind and the waves to be able to do that, how they navigated it. When I first saw it, I wasn't quite at all sure. I thought at first it was a game. Take a look at the picture on my blog. Read the article because I have some links there that are really interesting. But it struck me. I went back and looked at the poem, and I said, well, what if it was just a stick chart? The point that I'm trying to make is that it took a visit for me to a museum in Florida, in Miami, Florida, with a totally unrelated subject, to go back to the poem and look at it in a completely different perspective. I even put a faux map on there with shells and bamboo sticks to give you an idea of, could it be that simple? Is it just lines connecting dots? Is that what I'm missing? And I've spent the last week or so, and I'll probably spend more of the winter, looking at the poem in a completely new way that I hadn't before. And that's why I want to visit the Denver Museum. I have this sense that there's something inside the Denver Museum that will give me an indication of how Fenn sees his world, and has provided me an opportunity to see that world in the same way that he does. I know, esoteric, yes, but hey, we get to go to Denver. I like Denver.
Shane McLaughlin, why do you think Forrest Fenn has an obsession with Butch Cassidy?
Oh, son of a gun. These are all the questions that I told you not to ask. This was a why question.
Well, I'm going to answer it first.
Okay.
So I don't think it's an obsession. I think it's one of his many interests. And he met and worked with Robert Redford in selling him art. And I'm sure Robert Redford has a home in Santa Fe. One of his homes is in the Santa Fe area. And I'm sure they've spent time together. And Robert Redford was very interested in Butch Cassidy and Sundance Kid because, of course, he was in the movie. But he then did a documentary where they traveled on horseback along the Outlaw Trail, and he wrote a book about it. So I'm sure that when Forrest met Robert Redford was really invested in that story at that time, so that Forrest would have heard a lot about that, and he would have found Robert Redford to be a very interesting person.
I think I agree with Shelly on this one. I don't think Forrest's interest in Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid, or Butch Cassidy without the Sundance Kid, is any further than his relationship with Robert Redford, the book Robert Redford authored, the only book that Robert Redford authored on the Outlaw Trail, and the fact that he played the part, and the fact that he lives in Santa Fe. So I think his Butch Cassidy interest is tied to his relationship with Robert Redford rather than any deep, dark, I don't mean dark, any deeper.
And there's the whole connection with the Lander area, wasn't there, with Butch Cassidy?
Because the Outlaw Trail went right through Lander.
Yeah.
Yeah. They actually rode the horses through
that
there.
Way.
Yeah.
I don't think it's an obsession, though.
I wouldn't call it an obsession, certainly, any more than he's obsessed with his cache of Clovis points.
Okay, so here we go. Jared Atchley. If you guys find the treasure, will you continue to do the vlog? Well, I'll continue to do my shows, which is Wisdom Included and The Softer Side.
Yeah, so we get that question a lot. I think if the treasure, whether we find the treasure or not, if the treasure is found, we'll probably invest our time in something else. This is fun, but I don't think you could sustain this channel without the treasure out there. I mean, that part of what sustains this is the continued interest in the possibility of finding the treasure. Once it's found, I think we'll be as interesting. If the treasure is found, we're going to be as interesting as Forrest Fenn.
Well, we'll close it out. We'll say, this treasure's been found, and here's what we think about that. So we might do one show afterwards, but I can't see a reason either.
I'm kind of like Forrest. I wouldn't say I'm exactly like him. I have lots of other interests. A Gypsy's Kiss will stay around, but before 2009, a Gypsy's Kiss was all about sailing in a Cal 30. So we'll make a transition into something else, I'm sure.
Bill Shopman, do you know what types of art Mr. Fenn personally made? Was it castings? He made bronze castings.
He did mostly bronze castings, and there was a limited range. I don't think Fenn thinks of himself as an artist as much as he does a crafts person. Like my son. My son is a tinsmith, and he doesn't claim to be an artist. My daughter, on the other hand, is a true artist. But I think Fenn thinks of himself as a craftsman versus an artist. And so he had limitations. The times that I've read about him considering painting or sketching or anything, it didn't work out well for him. The bronze castings were like everything that Fenn does, an interest he took in the possibility, and then adding to it by making the little frogs and the dragonflies, things like that. That because of their rusticness, later became thought of as art. I don't think of him as an artist. I don't believe he thinks of himself as an artist. And I think the bronze castings were as close as he wanted to get to art and craft. And they were very good. I mean, one of the points he makes about what he did is he found a way to cast threads so that you could screw the caps onto the jars. That in and of itself, I mean, to do that is you have to understand the process of casting, lost wax casting, and he apparently figured it out. So, and he was able to make money running a small foundry. So,
but it wasn't something that he created and sold. I mean, he did work with other artists to create statues.
Right.
And that sort of thing,
like everyone else, like everything that Fenn has done, he realized the money was in marketing, not necessarily in producing the product.
Right.
From his perspective, it's important. It would be like me saying, as well as I do, is every once in a while I think, well, maybe I could make a living as a photographer. And I think about it for a night, a shower, and I go like, that's just crazy, right? I'd make more money teaching people how to take great photographs than I would selling photographs. And Fenn's like that. There's this, I can't remember where this story comes from. It could very well be Fenn, but it was when the gold rush, the new as the price of gold has gone up, and more people were looking for ways to go out and prospect and mine for gold. There was a company that now sells mining equipment. And when people say, why aren't you taking all this equipment and mining yourself? And he says, because I can make a lot more money selling this equipment to the miners than I could ever make going out and trying to do it myself, with a lot less pain, because I can ship the stuff to them. So I think Fenn's perspective is very similar. That is, why do the mining if what you can do is make money selling the miners what they need? So.
Yep. I agree. Carol Ferguson, do you know that the Tiwa Indians consist of the Water Clan in New Mexico, and is it part of your solve?
I do know that the Tiwa have a Water Clan. It is not part of our solve. Solution.
Mm. Chris Durbridge, his book collection seems to have a lot of letters and journals from historical people. Which people do you think he is fascinated by the most, and do you think the solve is historically based?
I believe there is all his interests are embedded someplace in the poem. History, archaeology, anthropology, geology, Western habitation, nature, etc. I think all of those are in the poem. In terms of letters and his collection, it seems to me that he's mostly interested in the West, what I'd call the Old West as well as the New West, and the people that were there. You know, he was fascinated by the artist Nikolai Fashin, who was Russian, did most of his work in France, and spent the last part of his life, the very end of his life, in Taos, New Mexico. And I think that whole Taos colony of artists became an interest to him, and that's how he added to his collection of papers. So I would say he gets the materials that are nearest to his interest, and his interests are pretty much west of the Mississippi and north of Santa Fe, and relate to the topics such as history, archaeology, anthropology, geology,
Indian culture,
and well, I guess that falls under the anthropological. Paleo. I mean, this is a guy who went out and bought what is now referred to as the Fenn cache of Clovis points before he knew a great deal about the cache, about Clovis points, and then by the end of it all, hosted a conference in Santa Fe on paleo weaponry that was pretty well recognized for the most part. It has its own story, but.
And Man in the Barn wants to know, what if the New Mexico Game and Fish Department and the state of New Mexico rewrote what warm waters mean? Does your solve change?
That's too hypothetical. That makes too many assumptions. That definition has been in place for decades now. Warm waters. There is no reason to change it unless the environment changed so dramatically. I don't know what would have to. I don't know what would have to happen in order for the definition to change. So unless the environment would change, therefore the habitat would change. If the environment would change and the habitat would change, then maybe they'd have to change those regulations. But that doesn't alleviate me of the responsibility from determining the poem in the context of the world that Fenn lived in. The simple fact of the matter is everything is in constant change. And the constant change is going to get progressively more dramatic over our lives, over the generations, whatever it is. But I think one of the important things that you have to recall as you're doing this is that you have to solve the poem not in the context of what that future time is, but in the context of the person that wrote it. So even if the game and fish regulations were to change in 20 years, you would have to go back to when Fenn wrote the poem and determine what the game and fish regulations were then, as opposed to 20 years from now. Context.
Okay.
Time.
You're just going to say words now?
Yeah.
Joy.
Joy.
Happiness.
Nap.
So Bill Gorman wants to know if the Facebook page for AGK has been shut down.
It has. Yes, Bill, it has. We just didn't have the time to maintain it. We feel like we want to focus on the blog and the YouTube channel. I don't want anyone to infer from that we're, everything from getting out of this and going to do something else. We just don't have the time to maintain it. And we have to always look at whatever we do in terms of ROI, return on investment, and the investment in time that it required just didn't produce an equal amount of return on that investment. So we decided, bang, let's just shut it down. There's plenty of other opportunities on Facebook with much larger communities to discuss it. And we want to focus on the blog. We want people coming to our blog. We want people coming to our YouTube channel. So, and by the way, you may also notice that my personal Facebook account has been reduced from around 2,500 friends to around 150 friends. So I'm doing the same thing. I'm kind of downsizing a lot of these things because I'm retarded. I may be retarded too, but ideally I'm just retired.
Ron Leake, how would you sell the treasure, or would Forrest Fenn buy it back?
Would not sell it to Forrest Fenn. If you look at, we've actually produced a video several months ago on what we'll do when we find the treasure, and our solution to the problem is we're going to auction it off at Sotheby's in New York City and monetize it as quickly as we can, so that all of that is not in our possession. We think having that in your possession is a dangerous place to be. We think it'll sell between from $5 to $8 million at auction, by the way. If it remains intact, we literally are not even going to open the jar. We're going to leave the whole thing intact. What do you call it? As is. Where is the coin thing? What do they say?
I don't know what you were talking about.
Oh, when a coin is perfect.
Mint.
Mint. Oh, not the coin. The Batman.
Mint in box.
Mint in box. It's going to be mint in box when we turned it over to Sotheby's to auction off to rich people.
Let's see. David Dow, do you know what year he started doing the bronze castings? Post-diagnosis of cancer? Yeah, he was still in the Air Force when he started.
Yeah, it was, and he was in Texas at the time. So yeah, it was pre-diagnosis, and it was, I'm going to guess mid to late 70s.
It was after he got back from Vietnam, but before he was out of the service. Right. Shane McLaughlin, where do the Kiowa Indians fit in the mix of all of this?
No idea. Never even heard the supposition. Sorry.
Jimmy Fast, do you think Forrest's cancer is related to his father's, as if they both contracted it by visiting the Los Alamos area together? Well, it was two different kinds of cancer.
Yeah, I think his father's cancer was pancreatic.
Yeah,
which is once you've got it, it's very difficult to cure, and I think and it's very painful, and it's assuredly it results in death. I think his was kidney cancer, and it was curable. They did it for him. He went into remission, and he's never had anything but since. But I don't think it has anything to do with Los Alamos. And the reason I suggest that is my uncle Albert worked at Los Alamos after he got out of the Navy for 22 years and died quietly in his bed from just old age.
Yeah. And there's still quite a large community there.
Yeah, there's a big community. There is no empirical, there is no epidemiological data that indicates living in or around or visiting Los Alamos is somehow related to your cancer. Because if there were, Santa Fe would have a high percentage of cancer patients because a lot of people that live in Santa Fe work in Los Alamos, make the drive up every day.
Okay, this is a little bit convoluted. Shane McLaughlin, Forrest Fenn said the clues are in order. Do you think the clues are in order in the poem, or that Forrest Fenn meant in order for you to follow in person, but they would not be in order in the poem the way we think?
If I remember correctly from the Moby Dickens video, and you can go back and take a look at that, it was very clear that the clues were in order and contiguous, is what he said. So contiguous, in order would imply numerically in order. Contiguous would imply that they're connected one after the other, as opposed to just popped around with you making a determination as to how they most relevantly fit your solution. So we believe the clues are not only in order, but they're contiguous. Step 1, warm water salts. Step 2, canyon down. Step 3, below the Homer Brown, et cetera, et cetera.
And we base that on the things that he said.
Now, the metaphors, the metaphors that the indexes, the locations that those metaphors represent are not, but we think it's continuous and contiguous.
Chris Durbridge, not including New Mexico Fish and Game Warm Waters reference, what other government survey or historical record have you read that used the term warm waters?
None. I've actually searched for it, for specifically that, a reference to it. What I found was that people came close. For example, in Montana and I think Colorado, they use warm water without the S. In several documents, government-related fish and game documents. But New Mexico is the only place in all my research that use precisely the phrase warm waters, and do it in a way that is contextual. Nobody is just saying, "Hey, warm waters, cold waters." Nobody's doing that. It's in the context of geographically precise locations.
Shane McLaughlin. Forrest Fenn said the treasure is wet, and still is, even to this very day, as the way he put it. Do you think it is due to a flash flood or possibly from snow buildup, but he wanted to mention it years later?
I think what he mentioned, if I remember correctly, he was asked that question in the middle of winter. And so I envisioned that he could have just as easily meant, I don't know if you've ever been in a west-facing cave in the Rocky Mountains, you're going to collect snow. You always want to find an east-facing cave. I know that sounds weird, but I've been there, done that. I think there are 3 ways Fenn could describe the chest as being wet. Number 1 is just simply the laws of physics and how bronze metal heats and cools, because in the daytime it's going to heat regardless of whether it's in a cave or not, and at nighttime it's going to cool. And if you've ever been in a cave, or for that matter a tent, condensation is going to form inside that edifice, and it's going to form on any surface where the change of temperature would require. And if you don't believe me, take something made of metal, put it in your refrigerator for an hour, take it back out and put it on your dining room table, and watch the condensation form. So that's the first phase. One possibility that has always intrigued me is that although Fenn has not said it was in water, I've found 3 locations in 3 states where there was a hollow behind the waterfall, and didn't require putting yourself at risk to get to that point. As a matter of fact, one of the most visible ones is the falls above Santa Fe, Tesuque Falls. Is it Tesuque or Pewaukee? One or the other. There's falls. But if you make that walk up there, and it's not an easy walk to make, I also don't think the treasure's there, but you can get behind the falls. And there are lots of locations in the United States where you can actually get behind the falls, where the treasure is not in the water, but it will stay wet as a result of the action of the falls and the mist that comes off that. So I think that's option number 2. Option number 3 is, when he was asked the question, was winter, and he could have imagined that it was just experiencing the natural winter heating, cooling, snow process. Any of those could have been likely. To me, I always look at version number 1, that is the laws of physics on a heavy metal box. So that's just condensation, heating and cooling.
I agree.
Thank you.
I think we're done.
Thank you, Professor. We're done?
And it's been 2 hours and 12 minutes. So
okay, I'm getting tired. Hey, I didn't mention this earlier, but for some reason or the other, I went to bed early last night. It's because I knew we had a gig this morning that was going to require some staging. And I ended up getting 3 hours sleep. And so I've been kind of
And you've just talked for
zombieing
2
around.
hours.
And I
of
just
that,
talked for 2
so.
hours. So I'm going to go take a nap or something. So anyway, thanks for joining us today. We hope you found it, as usual, informative. We'll see everybody when?
In 2 weeks, January 2nd. And next week we're taking off for Christmas. So thank you for spending 2 hours with us, and hopefully you can enjoy this, for 2 weeks. I don't know, live on it.
Go through it all. You're going to save me that chat so I can post it?
Yes, we'll save that.
All right.
And so we'll be back on the 2nd. And thank you so much
see if I can do this in order this time.
for visiting with us today, and for all of your great questions, and for our friends who took advantage of Super Chat. We thank you, and we appreciate all of you for being here today. Merry Christmas, Happy New Year, and for a Gypsy's Kiss the vlog, I'm Shelly Carney.
And I'm Toby Eunice. Thanks for watching. We'll see you in 2 weeks.
Bye-bye.